I'm listening to your show.
The point that there's limited news
I just want to know what your viewpoint is.
Because major news organizations have been told on, what they can report on.
The People's Voice. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is The People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am The People's Voice. Thank you again for checking us out this week. Appreciate the continued support and all of the well wishes for the podcast. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This week, I want to get into a discussion about food deserts. And if you don't know what that is, you've never heard the term, it's all right. I know when you first initially hear it, it sounds something far off and distant, and sometimes we feel disconnected from those type of subjects. But it is a very real and viable subject, a phrase. Food deserts. Today, I want to talk about food deserts here in the United States. Because like I said, when sometimes you hear that terminology, you might think that a food desert exists somewhere in another land. But unfortunately, food deserts exist here in the United States, and that's what I want to talk about today. So let me give a definition of what a food desert is, and then we'll move the discussion along. A food desert, and I'm going to read this definition directly. A food desert or food deserts are geographic areas where residents have few to no convenient options for securing affordable, it's very key, affordable and healthy foods, especially foods such as fruits and vegetables. And unfortunately, not shockingly, these are disproportionately found in, areas that have high poverty, areas that are under systematic oppression, areas that do not have adequate resources or infrastructure, and which unfortunately is common in neighborhoods of color throughout the United States. So that's what a food desert is. It's basically an area where there are no healthy or affordable food options. So, and this topic for me came up because I'm fortunate enough to move around a little bit, and I come across these food deserts in my travels. I've spent a lot of time in DC and also in Baltimore, as well as Philadelphia and several other cities, and these food deserts exist. And what it is about these food deserts is that it typically, like I said, are in areas that are systematically oppressed. You can almost, when you walk into certain neighborhoods, you can almost identify it. And I promise you, after today, if you've never heard of a food desert, the next time you are in one of these communities, you will immediately identify what a food desert area looks like. But again, it's a common place in terms of what food deserts look like. Now, I will say that food deserts not only exist in communities of color, but they also exist in other rural communities as well, particularly where, not only people of color, but also white people live. But in identifying food deserts disproportionately as the definition states, they are found in communities of color and communities that have high poverty rates. So, how do you identify, or how is a food desert identified? Well, one of the identifiers is the distance between where the residents actually live and where they can access food from. And typically, this is, anywhere from up to 9-10 miles away from where they are. So that's usually one of the identifiers. Another identifier is household resources in terms of, again, income and also vehicle availability. Again, you have the identifier in terms of the distance from where the person or persons live to where the nearest supermarket is that has the fresh food and affordable fresh food. That's key. And then also, do they have the ability to get there? Because in many of these food deserts, what you will find is that the individuals either don't have the proper transportation in terms of a vehicle, or if they live in an area that has public transportation, it is often a stretch just to get to the public transportation in order to get to the supermarket or fresh food market that has these foods. So those are the two identifiers. And then again, neighborhood resources. And what you'll find often in these food deserts is that not only do they not have direct access to supermarkets that have these type of foods, but you will also find that within these neighborhoods, the distance to resources or the distance to stores that have foods that are unhealthy or restaurants that are unhealthy are much closer in terms of location to the residents than the location of a supermarket that has fresh foods and vegetables. So let me do this. I want to play a clip from a news story. I was, obviously doing some research, and this is a resident who is talking about the distance and also the lack of having a supermarket in her neighborhood. And I just want you to hear a little bit directly from someone who this is affecting today and what that sounds like. So let me go ahead and play this clip, and then we'll continue the discussion.
There are really no viable food options. And it's crazy to me because people that live literally 3 to 5 miles away have 2 grocery stores, and that just so happens to be in a white neighborhood. Why is it that they have options and I don't? And just because I don't have the money that they have doesn't mean that I shouldn't have the access to food that they have.
And that's what living in a food desert is like. And she makes a great point. And by the way, that news story came from CNBC. I should say that interview was from a CNBC story on food deserts. But she makes a great point. Why is it that in her neighborhood, there is no access to a supermarket that has the necessary healthy foods that they can access within a distance that can be reached in terms of, from house to area? But then on the flip side of that, you have in as she referred to, in a white neighborhood, you've got almost, 2 supermarkets in a, 3 mile to 5 mile radius. And of course, those restaurants are properly supplied with the necessary food options, affordable food options. But again, we're talking relative because, those neighborhoods obviously have the financial resources, but still they have the options of accessing nutritious and healthy food. And, quite often that is a part of the discussion. So it's just not the fact that these neighborhoods don't have the supermarkets in them. It's also the access to get to them, which is also part of the problem. And I wanted to play one other portion of that clip because she kind of just reiterates what I was saying in terms of what type of options are in neighborhoods that have food deserts. It's not healthy food, and that food leads to so many other issues. But let me play that clip, and then we'll continue with the discussion. Check this out.
So this is a convenience store that is pretty close to my mom's house, and it's one of the only options that we have for food and groceries. They don't have any fresh food. They have a lot of canned and processed stuff. It's not the best, but it's kind of like all we have in this community.
And that is the problem. So when you start talking about some of the disparities with health issues and life expectancy in neighborhoods of color and people of color, these are the contributing factors to why there are such disparities in those type of rates. So when you hear about people of color having are more afflicted with hypertension and diabetes and stroke, well, your diet plays a major role in that. And if you don't have adequate access to proper diet, then of course, the individuals, the residents in your community are going to be afflicted with a greater number of issues in terms of health issues. So I'm going to continue reading here, and I'm getting this. I'm doing my research from the Annie E. Casey Foundation. They did a report on food deserts in the United States. So again, we talked about the areas, who's affected. So exactly how many people are affected by this? Well, it's estimated that almost 40 million people in the United States right now are living in low income and low access areas. They're living in food deserts. And this is according to the USDA's research report on food access. And within that group, it's estimated that almost 19 million people had limited access to a supermarket or a grocery store. So you got almost 40 million people living in food deserts. Almost half of them don't even have the access to get to a supermarket, which basically means that those who can't get to the supermarket are subjected to whatever's in that neighborhood. And typically, as I stated, and as you heard in the previous clip, what is usually left in those neighborhoods for individuals to access is processed food. And those processed foods are never good for you, especially if you're consuming them on a regular basis. So I guess the question then becomes, well, why is this the case, right? If we know that food deserts are dangerous to the individuals who live within them, and they do not create any type of value, why do they exist? Because that's one of the questions that I wanted to know. Like, well, why does this occur? And there have been many different philosophies and explanations to why this exists. Now, for those of you who've listened to me now for the past 3 months, I believe everything is by design. So I don't believe anything is happenstance. I firmly believe that this is part of a greater plan or an execution of plans to suppress individuals, particularly people of color, right? Because there are already a number of plays within the system to oppress people of color, but this is just another way to do so, because if you're afflicted with constant poor food choices, which then lead to poor health, um, poor health, poor health outcomes, then of course you're going to be suppressed in some way, right? If you're constantly sick and have health challenges, how do you work? How do you build a business if you're constantly afflicted? So I'm getting off topic, but me personally, I think there's a bigger play here, and this is by design. But some of the theories, or not even theories, but some of the explanations to why food deserts exist. First of all, you have transportation challenges, which I totally agree with. Right there, if you live in an area that has a food that has no supermarket and you don't have a car, and transportation is 5 blocks down, 3 blocks over to get to the bus, you got to walk to the train, you got to try to catch an Uber if you have the funds for that. I mean, transportation challenges plays a huge role in it. Convenience of food. Now, again, people of color, not just people of color, but low income families across this country are more likely to live in communities that are populated with small corner stores, right? In New York, we call them the bodegas. Jill Biden, bodega, not Bogota. She was off the chain. You got the corner stores that are usually more likely to be present in communities that have low income or low income households. You have more convenience markets. You have more fast food vendors. Again, I referenced Baltimore and DC and Philadelphia. I mean, I've been to a lot of cities, a lot of cities, and it is a common theme. Like, you can literally go down the boulevard, you can go down the avenue, and you will literally see corner store processed food, chips, sweetened drinks with color, cereals, things of that nature, right? Then you got the corner store. Then a half a block over or next door, you've got the Chinese restaurant. Then next door down, you got the liquor store. And then the process repeats itself over and over again. Then there's a Popeyes or a McDonald's. Well, I don't want to just call out, the fast food restaurants, but you know who they are and you know the communities that they're in. So this is another reason why fast food deserts exist, because these areas are then populated with options that are not healthy and are not lending to good health habits. Some have argued that it's an added risk, and this kind of goes back and forth in terms of conversation, because ultimately the goal for any store is to make money. But many who argue the point that opening a grocery store in any neighborhood is an investment risk. I mean, those who work in retail and those who work in the supermarket space, that margins are very thin. Many people call it a penny business. Literally, a penny can change whether or not a supermarket is profitable or not profitable. But at the same time, if you build it, then the people will come to it, right? Because I firmly believe, and I know this because I've had these conversations, individuals who live in these neighborhoods want healthy options, right? But it has to be within distance of them to be able to get to it, or there has to be a mode of transportation that's developed, better transportation infrastructure that's developed to allow them to get to it. But a lot of security, a lot of chains, in terms of your larger grocery chains, are sometimes against putting grocery stores in these neighborhoods because they argue that there is a higher threat of crime, that insurances that they need to take out for the security risk are much higher. There's security costs for private security, things of that nature. So these are some of the arguments to why food deserts exist and why a lot of these neighborhoods don't have access to these supermarkets. And then last but not least, the argument has been income inequality, which I've talked about 1,000 times already on this podcast. Listen, healthy food costs more. It just does. I'm fortunate enough to live in a neighborhood with too many healthy options. If I'm being frank, I mean, I've got 4 or 5 big chain supermarkets in my neighborhood, literally 3 miles radius, right? And it's expensive. And, even for me, going into a store, I'm like, the cookies are on sale for $3, but the grapes are $6.50 for 3 pounds of grapes. And it's like, I can't even imagine I shouldn't say that. Imagine if I'm trying to make a decision between the last bit of money that I have, or if I'm not generating a lot of money and I'm hungry. I've got kids that are hungry. Do I buy the $3 cookies, or do I now get on a bus, go to a supermarket that's going to charge me $6, $7, $10, $20 for fresh fruits, fresh vegetables? Or do I stay here in my neighborhood where I can send my little son up the street, my little daughter up the street to go get, 2 packs of cookies, and then everybody is satisfied for the day? Or run into the Chinese restaurant and get, a whole meal for $4. So income equality is another reason why food deserts exist, because the cost of healthy food is exorbitant. And this, regardless of your income status, we know this to be true. So those are what food deserts are. And I wanted to talk about it a little bit today because, with the coronavirus, this has even created a much bigger issue now, because now you have, not only do you have stores that were already out of reach of the residents that live in these communities, but then many of the smaller stores that were in the community have closed as well. So even if you had a small market that maybe was selling barely fruits and vegetables, that store is closed because the pandemic has made it, very difficult for businesses to stay open, small businesses. And then a lot of these restaurants and a lot of the bigger supermarket chains have changed their hours, so they're opening later, then they don't stay open as late as they did. It's a lot going on. So this problem has only expounded since the pandemic has taken place, which doesn't fare well for individuals who already live in these communities. So, what solutions can we offer? Well, like many of the topics that I discuss on this program, this is not just a single person resolution, right? This is going to require great focus, great energy, great strategy, well thought out decision making to help reduce this. Now, many have talked about incentivizing grocery stores and supermarkets to come into underserved neighborhoods. Usually, when you start talking about incentivizing, that's tax breaks. When you bring in the tax breaks, then that also is a depletion of revenue for that city or town, and they have to make that up somewhere else. And it starts getting tricky because then they start looking at property taxes. Property taxes go up, then you have initiated a form of gentrification because the people that live in the area can't afford it. And then you already know where this goes. So that's not always the best option. A lot of individuals have been kind of against having these big chain supermarkets move into their neighborhoods because they're often afraid that when they come in, this is going to create gentrification, right? Because once you have a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's that come into the